H.R. 2494 is the Police Act of 2023. Police Act makes assaulting a law enforcement officer a deportable offense. Unfortunately, assaults on law enforcement officers are on the rise. According to the FBI, assaults on law enforcement officers increased 11.2% between 2020 to 2021. Several of these violent incidents have been perpetrated by illegal aliens drawn to the U.S. by President Biden's open border policies. Yet under current immigration laws, assault of a police officer is not explicitly stated as a deportable offense. Those who serve as our front line of defense against crime should be equally protected. The Police Act ensures our immigration laws reflect that point. The second item I'll discuss is H.R. 3091, the Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapon Purchase Act. Unlike many states and municipalities, federal law currently does not allow federal law enforcement officers to purchase their service weapon when that weapon is being retired. Instead, it is mandated to be destroyed. H.R. 3091 ensures that federal law enforcement officers in good standing are given the opportunity to purchase their service weapon when it's being retired, providing law enforcement officers the same opportunity that many of their fellow officers at the state and local level receive. It also saves Americans money, ensuring that we need not waste taxpayers' dollars destroying service weapons that can instead recoup some of the cost of the original purchase. Finally, our third item is Congressional Resolution 40. This is a resolution expressing congressional support for law enforcement officers while also opposing efforts to defund, disband, dismantle, or abolish the police. The United States has, unfortunately, witnessed a wave of progressive activists pushing to, quote, defund the police, unquote, mantra in recent years. This movement ushered in a predictable result, spikes in crime across the country, but particularly concentrated in major cities that chose to defund the police or to embrace other anti-police policies. In passing Congressional Resolution 40, the House of Representatives will be making clear where we stand. We stand with law enforcement officers and oppose efforts to defund the police. We celebrate those who've chosen to dedicate their lives and careers to the protection of their fellow citizens. Above all, we honor the memory of officers who've fallen in the line of duty. I now yield to my good friend, our distinguished ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, can I just yield for a brief but sad announcement from our colleague, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez?
Certainly. The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ranking member. Today in Farmington, New Mexico, gun violence took the lives of at least 3 of our elders. It wounded 2 of our police officers, a Farmington police officer and a state police officer, who went quickly to the scene. It paralyzed Farmington, New Mexico's small but beautiful community in fear. I praise the heroes who drove quickly and acted to defend so more lives were not lost. I pray for those who are still in the hospital. You know, we stand on the floor of the House so many weeks out of the year with each state as we stand up to say of people who are lost and read their names out loud and we all issue our prayers. Nobody is immune. Our beautiful district is not immune. Every single day we lose beautiful souls to gun violence. I imagine a world where mothers and fathers are not afraid to drop their kids off at school, where the daughters and sons and grandchildren are not afraid for their grandparents, who are also sometimes as easily shot as our children. I pray for that day when our police officers have the resources they need and are not indeed facing cuts, federal cuts, that this Congress voted on. 2 weeks ago, was it? I pray for the day when peace and love are what we celebrate. When we don't just issue resolutions that say we support our police and our law enforcement officers, but we actually back it up with action. We back it up with funding. I've done that. I've met with my Farmington police officers just a couple of weeks ago. I talked to them about the work that we had done in the Safer Communities Act and how we can try to get resources to them so that they could work with those who were addicted, those who had mental health problems. It was an amazing meeting with these same police officers who rushed to the scene, 2 of whom were wounded. I spoke recently with the sheriff of San Juan County because he is on top of my list to provide a mobile unit because they have a sort of jerry-rigged mobile unit for when they respond to crises like this. They don't even have the right equipment. And I have them as one of my congressionally directed projects because I know we must support our law enforcement. We must do more than pass a resolution that just says stuff, some of which is not true. We must do more, and we must back it up with actual, real congressional action to address gun violence, to provide a law enforcement with the resources they need. So I imagine that tomorrow we will ask the Speaker if the state of New Mexico can stand in front of the realm and ask everybody to pray for all of those who we lost. And I ask us today to think about the real consequences of the actions we take or fail to take to address this scourge that hurts not just the innocent, it hurts the innocent law enforcement officers who need more from us. Thank you very much, Ranking Member. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this afternoon we're here to consider a trio of bills that evidently constitute a new GOP position on the police. And I call it a new position because my friends have truly lost their way on this issue. The new Republican position, as set forth by their front-runner for President of the United States, is that we should pardon convicted criminals who violently beat, assaulted, bear-sprayed, and threatened to kill cops on January 6th. The new Republican position, as set forth by the Speaker of the House, is that they want to give George Santos due process before they kick him out, but they want to deport legal immigrants who haven't even been charged with a crime. The new Republican position is that they want to defund the police. After all their kicking and screaming about how Democrats don't support cops, this month the GOP passed a bill that cuts funding for local law enforcement. A bill that would fire 400 local law enforcement officers and take millions of dollars away from the very same local law enforcement officers that they are wrapping their arms around today. And finally, and perhaps most outrageously, the new Republican position is that they support some police, but not all. Now, let me just tell folks who may not know, we have been waiting for months for them to pass a simple resolution praising the police. I mean, my colleagues actually made a bill in order under their rules package. I mean, they've been planning since January to bring this bill up. And originally it praised all police. Now, all of a sudden, and we know why, it has been changed, reduced to only praising some police, the ones that won't get them in trouble with the QAnon crazies and the MAGA wingnuts. We've been waiting and waiting for Republicans to put their money where their mouth is on their back the blue rhetoric. And this is what we get, a non-binding, symbolic resolution that conveniently cuts out all federal law enforcement, a resolution which cuts out every officer at the FBI, the ATF, the CBP, the U.S. Marshal Service, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and the Federal Protective Services, and the Secret Service. This is a resolution which cuts out the U.S. Capitol Police, who protected us on January 6th, brought forward by the same party that voted against recognizing the heroism of the Capitol Police on January 6th. 3 members of this committee even voted against recognizing the Capitol Police for their service on January 6th. And there are members of this body, members who said that that day was, quote, just a normal tourist visit. Members who like to act all tough, but who I literally watched cower behind the Capitol Police that day because they were so fearful. And now my GOP colleagues are here, not only refusing to praise the Capitol Police, but in fact dishonoring and disrespecting them, dishonoring the same police who are outside this room right now, keeping us safe. And it's clear that my Republican friends have lost their way on law enforcement. And it's clear who's in charge here. It's not Speaker McCarthy. It's the most extreme of the extreme. And I get why there is a new Republican position. I mean, they supported the police right up until they realized that the laws of this country applied to George Santos and the MAGA insurrectionists and to Donald Trump, too. Look, the bottom line is these bills are a collection of weak talking points that politicize the police instead of keeping our community safe. And if my Republican friends want to talk about public safety, great. Let's talk about keeping people safe from gun violence. We just heard the tragic news from my colleague, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez. Let's talk about people safe from crime in Republican states where murder rates and violent crimes are through the roof. Let's talk about how Democrats passed bills to help cops with PTSD and to invest in small police departments, and Republicans voted no. I mean, Democrats have solutions, but sadly my Republican friends put politics over public safety, and they are refusing to support the Capitol Police. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I would like to welcome our first panel, Representative Biggs and Ranking Member Nadler from the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Biggs, welcome back to the Rules Committee, and I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Rules Committee. I'm grateful to be here in front of you today. As we celebrate National Police Week, it is fitting that we're here today to consider 3 bills that will actually help the men and women who serve in our communities every day. All 3 of these bills should be non-controversial and receive bipartisan support. The first is H.R. 2494, the Police Act of 2023, which makes aliens removable if they assault a law enforcement officer. 43,649. That staggering number is the number of law enforcement officers who were assaulted while performing their duties in 2021. That was an 11.2% increase from 2020. In both 2021 and 2022, at least 64 law enforcement officers were shot and killed in the line of duty. That's 21% more than the average number of officers killed by gunfire from 2010 to 2020. To make matters worse, many of those incidents involve criminal aliens who take advantage of our immigration system and then turn around and assault the very people who protect us every day. In a single 2-month operation in 2020, ICE arrested 1,500 aliens who were removable because of assaults. In 2019, ICE arrested aliens who accounted for 45,804 assault convictions and charges. The reports speak for themselves. And just 2 months ago, an illegal alien violently assaulted a U.S. Border Patrol agent as she attempted to arrest him. In November 2022, 2 aliens were arrested for pushing, dragging, and punching a Border Patrol agent in another incident. And those acts of violence are not limited to the Border Patrol. Just last fall, a criminal alien was sentenced to 30 years in prison for stabbing an NYPD officer, taking his gun, and shooting at other officers. In 2020, a criminal alien shot and killed a Houston police sergeant as he responded to a domestic violence call. Despite these acts, the immigration statute does not explicitly make assaulting a law enforcement officer a deportable offense. H.R. 2494 changes that by creating a ground of removability specific to aliens who assault a law enforcement officer. Although many such offenders can be removed based on other grounds, such as an aggravated felony or a crime involving moral turpitude, H.R. 2494 ensures that these criminal aliens cannot escape the immigration consequences of their actions through legal loopholes. Determining whether an alien is removable from the country is not as straightforward as it should be. The processes have a bit of a problem. In a case just last year, to illustrate the Byzantine nature that can erupt in the immigration process, a federal judge observed that the process to determine whether an alien had been convicted of a crime that would make him removable presented, quote, a single legal question about a single conviction, close the quote. The analysis of this, a single legal question, and this is the judge again, spawned over 11 years and counting 4 decisions by the Board of Immigration Appeals, 4 decisions by 3 different immigration judges, approximately 6 rounds of briefings, and a split opinion by a federal court. And what was the question? Whether a California conviction for rape of an unconscious victim was a deportable offense. This bill goes a long way to avoid the absurd results of that approach. And it makes crystal clear that an alien who assaults a law enforcement officer can be removed from the United States. My colleagues across the aisle have argued that this bill would encompass too much conduct due to state definitions of assault. That could not be further from the truth. Listen to what the bill requires. 1, an admission or a conviction. 2, of an assault offense. 3, the assault must have been against a law enforcement officer. And 4, that assault must have been while the law enforcement officer was performing his or her duties, because of the performance of those duties, or because of his or her status as a law enforcement officer. The Democrats' far-fetched hypotheticals make light of assault against law enforcement officers and do not align with reality. Make no mistake, criminal aliens who assault the dedicated men and women of law enforcement should find no safe harbor in our immigration laws. H.R. 2494 gives adjudicators another tool to ensure that these criminal aliens can be quickly removed from the country. In doing so, we make America safer not only for our citizens, but also for the hardworking men and women of our law enforcement who serve our communities every day. H.R. 3091, the Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapons Purchase Act, requires the GSA to establish a program that allows a federal law enforcement officer to purchase a retired handgun from the federal agency that issued the gun. Currently, agencies are required to destroy unneeded firearms. This regulation accounts for millions of dollars wasted in federal funding. This bill is not just a pro-law enforcement, it is pro-taxpayer as well. And American taxpayers should not be forced to pay twice for the same firearm, first when it's originally purchased and second when it is needlessly destroyed. This bill allows some of that cost to be recovered by allowing law enforcement officers to purchase retired service weapons at fair market value. And finally, we're considering H-Con Res 40, which expresses support for local law enforcement officers and condemns efforts to defund or dismantle local law enforcement agencies. I think we all agree with those sentiments. It's important that we not just recognize and appreciate local law enforcement officers, but condemn calls to defund, disband, dismantle, or abolish our local police departments, police departments. If anything, the past 3 years have taught us that. Not surprisingly, jurisdictions that defended their law enforcement saw dramatic increases in crime. Villainizing our local law enforcement officers raises the national temperature and further complicates officers' dangerous jobs. It is time that this body condemns that foolish idea, that the one that says defunding our police is a good thing for the communities we serve. And I want to just address briefly, if I may, the contention that because this bill and what we're doing today focuses on local law enforcement, that somehow, and because there's been critiques given of the federal law enforcement, our federal police apparatus, that somehow we are reaching a new position. The Durham report just came out today. The conclusions of the Durham report were scathing. What did he find? He said, our investigation revealed that senior FBI personnel displayed serious lack of analytical rigor towards the information that they received, especially information received from politically affiliated persons and entities. Further, he wrote, at the direction of Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, Deputy Assistant Director of Counterintelligence Peter Strzok, they opened Crossfire Hurricane immediately. He also said the FBI and the Department of Justice acted without appropriate objectivity or restraint. There is a reason that people are scrutinizing our federal police apparatus. And I think that we should take that into consideration as well. I'll address one other issue. This idea with regard to the pardons. Through the history of America, our Constitution has been respected when presidents have offered pardons or clemency to individuals. That has been, I don't know of a case. We've scoured. We can't find a single case where a secondary or a succeeding administration is attempted to set aside clemency or pardon. That's not what's happening with this DOJ. So I think any allusion to the fact that we support pardoning of people, I always thought that was a bipartisan, constitutionally accepted notion until this administration, which is attempting to set aside clemency and pardons and having a list of people that they wish to do that to. There's a reason that some of us look with a great deal of scrutiny about what our federal police apparatus is doing. I encourage everyone to vote for these three bills. I think they represent where the American people are, and they certainly represent where I am, and I'll yield back. Thank you.
Ranking Member Nadler, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about the three bills before us today. Unfortunately, these bills represent a wasted opportunity to advance meaningful legislation that would support the men and women of law enforcement who put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. One bill is good, it's perfectly good as far as it goes, but is significantly weaker than it should be. Another is a non-binding resolution that amounts to nothing more than empty rhetoric designed to score cheap political points. And the third would target and scapegoat immigrants while doing nothing to actually protect law enforcement officers. Together, they are a perfect encapsulation of a Republican majority that is better at pounding its fist on the table while talking tough and making gratuitous attacks on immigrants than doing the hard work of serious legislating. H.R. 3091, the Federal Law Enforcement Officer Service Weapon Act, would allow a federal agency to sell a retired handgun to the law enforcement officer who had been using it, transferring it from a service weapon to a weapon in the hands of a responsible gun owner who is trained to use it. This was a good idea when it was introduced last Congress on a bipartisan basis by former Congresswoman Val Demings. Unfortunately, we ran out of time before we could act on the bill. When it was reintroduced this Congress, however, on a strictly partisan basis, two important provisions were removed. The first would have required the law enforcement officer to undergo a background check, a nearly instantaneous process before receiving the weapon. Although the bill does require the officer to be in good standing, there may be circumstances that an agency is not aware of that could be caught by a NICS background check. It is disappointing that the majority would remove such a simple requirement that could prevent a gun from falling into the wrong hands. Also disappointing was the decision to remove a sense of Congress that the amounts received by the government from selling a retired service weapon should be used to fund evidence-based gun violence prevention or gun safety education and training programs. This is a disturbing indication of the Republicans' priorities, which apparently do not lie in efforts to reduce gun violence. Although I support passage of this weaker version of H.R. 3091, I urge the majority to reconsider its misguided approach and to restore the provisions that were dropped from the Demings bill. Although H.R. 3091 would make a modest improvement to the law, the same cannot be said for H.Con. Res. 40, a non-binding resolution that does nothing to help our law enforcement officers do their jobs, does nothing to solve crimes or promote justice, does nothing to take deadly weapons like those used to target police officers off of our streets, and does nothing to make our communities safer. Instead, it contains incendiary language, makes false and misleading claims, ignores the contributions of federal law enforcement, and does nothing to support law enforcement in the performance of their duties or to keep them safe. H.Con. Res. 40 is a hopelessly misleading resolution that omits crucial context and ignores crime trends across the country, including the disturbing rise in gun violence and the higher per capita murder rate in states won by Donald Trump. It bends over backwards to praise state and local law enforcement, but not federal law enforcement, in order to leave room for Republicans like Donald Trump, Chairman Jordan, and Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are outspoken in their drive to defund the police, at least those who work at the ATF and the FBI. Notably, while the resolution states that violent leftist extremists have attacked law enforcement, curiously, it makes no mention of the violent mob of far-right extremists and white supremacists that stormed the Capitol 2 years ago, injuring 140 police officers that day, with 5 others losing their lives in the days after. While Republicans want to talk tough with non-binding resolutions, it was Democrats who passed the bill last Congress to actually fund and support the police. But where were Republicans when Democrats went about the serious work of legislating? When given the opportunity to put action behind their cheap rhetoric, time and again Republicans voted no. This is not and never has been a serious approach to legislating or to protecting law enforcement. The final bill before us today, the Police Act, hits the Republican jackpot. They get to look tough while not accomplishing very much, and they get to demonize and target immigrants while they do it. Let me be clear. Assaulting a law enforcement officer is a serious offense and cannot be tolerated. If this bill closed an actual gap in current law and made our country safer, Democrats would gladly support it. But because this bill is so broadly drafted, people who pose no real danger to law enforcement will now become subject to deportation. That does not make our country safer. People who are convicted of serious assaults on law enforcement officials are already deportable. This bill would not change that fact, but this bill does not include any requirement that the assault actually cause harm. No actual physical injury would be required. It does not even require that the individual be convicted of a crime. Simply that the assault or act constituting assault was committed, that the individual admits to the commission. Without any limitation, this could lead to absurd results. For example, I'll give you 3 examples. Under the terms of this bill, a green card holder in a fire who pushes a firefighter out of the way of a falling beam would have committed assault and would become deportable. Likewise, if a foreign student whose religion prohibits blood transfusions is receiving medical care from an emergency medical technician and he swats the EMT's hand away because she's trying to give him a blood transfusion, that student will have committed assault on a law enforcement officer and become deportable under this bill. Another example, if a green card holder sees a fight on the street and attempts to intervene by getting between the individuals and pushes them apart, if one of the individuals was an undercover police officer performing his duties, an unknown, obviously, to the person who separates the 2 fighters, if one of the individuals was an undercover police officer performing his duties, the individual who tried to break up the fight would have committed assault under this bill and become deportable. Now, these are absurd results, and Republicans may say they're not the intentions of the bill, but that's what the bill would do. It should be clearly redrafted, and as I said, assaults against police officers, real assaults, are already deportable. Furthermore, despite what the Republican majority spent most of its time talking about at our markup, this bill is not about undocumented immigrants who are already removable, as I said. This bill applies largely to people who have been lawfully admitted to the country, people who have set down roots and established themselves in the United States. For years, we have had a bipartisan understanding that people like these should only be deported for a serious offense. This bill breaks down that understanding. Mr. Chairman, Police Week ought to be a unifying event, a time when we can all come together in a bipartisan fashion to recognize and to offer our appreciation to the men and women of law enforcement who put their lives on the line each and every day to protect us. But instead of offering serious legislation, Republicans have offered us political talking points and largely meaningless bills that will neither protect law enforcement nor enhance our safety. I urge the majority to reconsider its decision to bring these 3 bills forward. I yield back the balance of my time.
In the interest of time, the chair will forego his questions, and we'll go to the distinguished vice chair of the committee, the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I do want to thank our witnesses for bringing these bills before us today. Thank you for your thoughtful testimony. It is appropriate that we consider these bills during the week that is set aside to honor the peace officers who we have lost over the past year. I want to read the names of some of the officers that have been lost in the district that I represent. Stephen Robert Northam from Carrollton, Texas, died 18 October 2022. John Paul Mestis, Double Oak, Texas, died February 7th, 2022. Lonnie Pulver Sneed, Double Oak, Texas, died February 15, 2022. Thomas Hutchison, Haltom City, Texas, 10/27/21. Billy Wayne Sheets of the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office, who died 5 June 2022. We do always need to keep these officers and their families in our prayers. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized, ranking member, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my Republican friends have called this National Police Week. And the chairman of the committee opened up his remarks by referring to National Police Week. He didn't say local police week or certain police week. He said National Police Week, and that's how my Republican friends have been advertising this week. And I'm just puzzled by the fact that when my Republican friends passed their rules package in January, they made in order a bill to recognize and praise all of our police. And it included local, it included the state police and the federal police. And somewhere along the line, a decision was made to change that. I mean, you made it in order, we were just waiting for it to come up. And you made a conscious decision to remove some of the police from this bill. Why did you do that? Mr. Biggs, I mean, what was the rationale behind going back, changing what you originally had brought forward? Why did somebody think it was a good idea to take out, for example, the Capitol Police?
So I would just think, I'd beg to differ with you. I think you're mischaracterizing what's happening here today. So, for instance, in the Garbarino bill, that's assault against a law enforcement officer. Doesn't matter whether it's federal or local. The other one is actually for federal law enforcement officers. That's 3091.
No, I mean, the concurrent resolution that you are offering.
And then we get to
focus on the local police. So somebody made a decision. Why did you do that?
And then you move to the third bill. So you're trying to couple, I think, the whole picture, and you're trying to say.
No, in the rules package.
I understand.
Yeah, you had a bill that,
Yeah.
that basically recognized all the police.
That's correct.
Including the federal police.
And this package before.
And this
I don't
one
want to
does it,
interrupt. I'm
right.
sorry.
No, and I'm just
interrupted.
curious,
Yeah.
like who made the decision to say, well, we don't want to recognize the Capitol Police, or we don't want to recognize and praise the federal police?
I think that you're mischaracterizing this, and so let me just help you out. I want to help you out if I can. You've got 3 bills before you. That's the package for Police Week, and it includes federal, state, and local officers. And I just gave you the reasons why. I'll do it again.
H-Con Res 40 does not, I could read it to you, it doesn't recognize federal police officers. I mean, I could, the original version that you introduced, that the Republicans introduced as part of their rules package that was going to be made in order, did. And so somebody made a decision to narrow it. I mean, and it's because I'm assuming that, and this is on H-Con Res 40, when it says condemns calls to defund, disband, and dismantle or abolish the police, I'm assuming that that doesn't include Marjorie Taylor Greene's call to defund the FBI, for example.
So we're going to, I guess we're going to just keep talking past each other. This is not meant to be a single bill. This is a package of bills. That's what, and let me just remind you, I just want to remind you that every year that you guys were in charge, you passed a package of bills. That's what we do. We do pass a package of bills. And this bill, and this particular effort includes a package of bills.
So which part of this bill praises federal law enforcement officials?
I'm not sure that this particular bill by itself does.
Well,
but
that's my point. So somebody made a decision to do that. I mean, I don't really, and I don't quite, I mean, what is so controversial about praising the Capitol Police or the FBI? I know a number of members, and I think Mr. Biggs, including you, voted against providing the Capitol Police a congressional gold medal. So I'm just wondering, what is the, is that, I mean, what is controversial about praising the Capitol Police? They protect all of our lives and the lives of our staff here.
I don't think there's anything controversial in praising the Capitol Police. But I do think there is something controversial when you take a package of bills that are meant to be a package of bills, and you have the first bill that specifically applies also to the feds. You have another bill that applies to the feds as well. It applies to all of them. And then you get to this one, and this, so you're going to say, oh, my gosh, you guys are just the most unreasonable folks.
Nothing in any of these bills praises the Capitol Police.
Oh, is that it? Is that what you're looking for? You're just looking for a sentence that says, oh.
Well,
We've done that. Have we not done that?
I'm going to yield to Mr. Nadler in a minute, but I'm just curious as to, you had a bill that was introduced as part of your rules package, which included all the police, and now you have changed it. So I don't think it was an accident that you changed it. Obviously, I think some of your members wanted to fund the FBI, and some of your members are still, I have a problem with the Capitol Police because of what happened on January 6th. They don't like the fact that the Capitol Police defended this institution from people who wanted to basically overturn the results of an election, and it's an inconvenient reality for them. But I mean, but it'd be something. I mean, so maybe that's it. I'm just trying to say, why was a decision made to?
So I'm happy to elaborate.
And in the markup, by the way, my understanding is in the markup, these things were offered and they were all rejected. Mr. Nadler, I don't know whether you want to.
So
Well,
I would hope I get a chance to respond.
That's what I wanted to say. And H-Con Res 40, as you noticed, refers only to local law enforcement.
Right.
In every paragraph.
Right.
And it refers to the, in 2020, there was leftist and progressive politicians called for the defunding of the police. Whereas in 2020, there were 21,000 murders. We, the Democrats on the committee during the markup last week, offered repeated amendments to add federal police, to refer to the federal police that we were praising them to refer to the January 6th attack, not only to the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots. All of these amendments were either voted down by the majority, by the Republicans, or ruled on germane. Now, we thought they were all germane, but they were all ruled, but some of them were ruled on germane, and the others were all voted down. So there was a conscious decision by the Republicans not to deal with federal law enforcement and not to deal with the January 6th insurrection, presumably because Donald Trump was responsible for the January 6th insurrection. I yield back.
Mr. Biggs, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you want to take me down a rabbit hole, and that's
No,
great.
I-
That's great. No, I mean, you do.
This is a
I mean,
simple
this
question.
this is all about January 6th for you guys
No.
because you're a one-note piano. I get it.
No.
So when you start hitting the piano about January 6th, let's just say, I get where you're coming from, but let's also talk about the Durham report that just came out today.
Yeah, all right.
And let's talk about this as what it is. It's a package of bills that deal with federal and local law enforcement. But it didn't deal with it the way you wanted, so now it's a January 6th issue. So I get it. That's all you got. So go ahead. Hang your hat on that.
Yeah, you guys made this decision, by the way, before the Durham report came out. I mean, you noticed this bill last week. I don't know whether you had an advanced copy of the Durham report, but I think the Durham report was a colossal waste of money. But let me just point out for the record, since you brought it up, federal prosecutors have secured convictions or confessions from Trump's campaign manager, deputy campaign manager, fundraiser, chief strategist, national security advisor, 2 foreign policy advisors, his personal lawyer, and his accountant. And Trump has been charged with 34 felony counts, and a jury of his peers said that he is a sexual abuser. Special Counsel Mueller issued 25 indictments against Russian nationals who attempted to undermine the 2016 election at the orders of Russian President Vladimir Putin. And I did a cursory reading of the Durham report online. I don't see any indictments. I think a number of you were saying there'd be multiple indictments. I don't know, did I miss something? Were there indictments?
Well, I don't know who said there'd be multiple indictments, but what I do...
Mr. Radcliffe, who was a former colleague who served in the
But I would just-
administrations, said lots of indictments.
Well, I can't speak for Mr. Radcliffe, but I can tell you that trying to get an indictment out of Merrick Garland is going to be pretty darn hard, unless you're a Republican, then you're likely to get indicted.
So essentially, I think what you're saying to us is that the reason why, for example, federal law enforcement was not included is because there are some of you who do not want to praise the FBI or actually favor defunding the FBI.
There may be. I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I'm just going to point out that this was intended to be a package of bills, and you've honed on a thing that you don't like, which is January 6th, so I get it.
I mean, it's a very simple question. The Republicans in their rules package made a bill in order that praised all of our police. Somewhere along the line, you decided to narrow it down, and nobody can really explain to me why. But nonetheless, you did. But I have one other question for you, Mr. Biggs. It's a little bit of this is a little off topic, but since you're here, I wanted to ask you. So I noticed things like the fact that on March 29th of this year, you introduced an astoundingly high number of bills, 521 bills, if I'm right, to slash funding for critical departments and agencies spanning the federal government, everything from the Council on Environmental Quality to the Office of Government Ethics, but over 500 bills.
Right.
Do you know how much it cost the American taxpayers for you to do that?
Yeah, but I know how much it would save if those bills were actually enacted. You know how much it would save if those bills were enacted?
Yeah, but I guess.
I mean, do you know how
Well,
much?
no, I guess the deal is you could have put on your website a list of the agencies you want to abolish or whatever, but you introduced 500 bills.
Yeah.
So it actually, the Government Publishing Office, GPO, alone, just them, it's $18,126 to be precise. And that's just to make publicly available your 521 bills. And I ask unanimous consent to insert the GPO letter in the record. And that doesn't take into account.
Without objection.
That doesn't take into account the costs incurred by the clerks to process the bills, the parliamentarians to review and refer the bills, and so on. So you wasted over $18,000 of taxpayer dollars in what? I guess an attempt to make a point about spending. But the ironic thing is that while you're decrying wasteful spending, government spending, you're wasting taxpayer dollars on a stunt that and that's it. It's a stunt. And if every member of Congress basically did what you did, we would that would be over 200,000 bills at a cost of nearly $8 million. So I pointed out because I know everybody around here likes to make all kinds of statements, and they think it's noteworthy or whatever, but there's a cost to all of this. And I just thought we should say that for the record, because I hope others don't follow your example by doing the same thing, because it will cost millions and millions of dollars.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because it's obvious that you didn't look too closely, nor did you consider how much that would have saved. If those bills would have been enacted, it would have saved over $100 billion a year.
Well, you could have introduced them all as one bill, too. And you're in charge, so you guys can do whatever, bring whatever you want to bring up.
Look,
but I just pointed out for the record.
Yeah, it's beautiful that's your issue, but I mean, I get it. Everybody around here is a political figure, and we do a lot of political things, and we're trying to make a point. And you know what? If those bills were enacted, you'd save $100 billion a year. You'd save over $1 trillion over 10 years. That's what you would get. And so I was happy to do it. I would encourage my colleagues to take a close look at those bills and see what they want to enact, and that'd be a good thing.
Yeah, I just said that's a waste of money to do it that way. But what I am concerned about today, though, is the intentional omission of men and women who serve our country, who protect us, who are part of our police force, who deserve to be recognized. And a decision was made, an intentional decision was made to change what my Republican colleagues introduced as part of their rules package in January. It is a much different bill, and I still don't know why. So, in any event, I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may care to pose to our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just have, I'm very proud to be here to support these bills, because, so for far too long, Mr. McGovern mentioned the cost, and there is a cost for the anti-police rhetoric that has been coming from the Democrats, and there is a cost. We lose officers. We can't recruit them. We can't retain them. Because of that, crime is skyrocketing all across the country, and so we need to make sure that we are doing what we can to support them. That I think Dr. Burgess mentioned some names of officers we've lost in the line of duty. We just lost one in my district, and I'm just very concerned that if we continue down this path of this anti-law enforcement rhetoric, it will get worse and worse, and we will lose all of our law enforcement officers. And we ask them to do a hard job for our communities, and they do it well, and they protect and serve. And so I'm happy to support these bills. And I hope I misheard Mr. Nadler when he said that something to the effect of that the bill, we were going after immigrants, and that in the past, we had kept deportation of immigrants for serious crimes. I think assaulting a police officer is a very serious crime, and that's why I think this should be in here. And you know, if I didn't hear you correctly, is that what did I not hear you correctly, Mr. Nadler?
I agree with you that assaulting a police officer is a very serious
Yes,
crime.
but that's not what you said, Mr. Nadler.
No, it is. No. Hear me out. Assaulting a police officer is a very serious crime. But that's not what this bill does. This bill makes not only assaulting a police officer a very serious crime, but performing the elements of assaulting a police officer. And doing the elements means that under, for example, the 3 examples I gave before, which I can repeat, some people with perfectly good intentions don't even know they're assaulting a police officer. You break up a fight, and one of them is a police officer. You push a fireman or a police officer out of the way of a falling beam in a fire. You've assaulted the police officer, technically under the terms of the bill. And that's why I said this bill doesn't make sense.
Mr. Nadler, I think that's a little far-fetched.
It's not far-fetched.
I think, well,
It may be
it's my
far-fetched,
time, Mr. Nadler.
but it is the
And
wording
Mr.
of the
Nadler.
bill. We have to look at the wording of the bill.
And I believe that Mr. Biggs wants to respond.
Yeah, so let's talk about the absurdity of those hypotheticals. And they referred constantly to what are the local statutes. Let me give you some local statutes. What would an assault be, let's say, in Arizona under ARS 13-1203? Intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causing any physical injury to another person. This bill says if that other person is a police officer, you're now subject to deportation. That has nothing to do with shoving someone out of the way because it's a burning fire, because they didn't have the requisite culpable mental state. It's absurd. How about this one? Intentionally placing another person in reasonable apprehension of imminent physical injury. You have to intend to place someone. None of his examples actually deal with the mens rea of the typical assault statute in any of the 50 states. How about this one? Knowingly touching another person with the intent to injure. Oh my gosh, I was pushing him out of the way, or I was going to stop a fight. Did you mean to injure him? No, I didn't mean to injure him. I didn't know I was going to injure him. I just wanted to stop the fight. But no, the absurdity of what I've heard today is consistent and, repeats what we heard in the actual hearing. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Biggs. And I will just wrap up because I'm not going to go too long. I just think that we are at a point where these bills support our police officers. We have to stop the anti-law enforcement rhetoric because we are doing serious damage to law enforcement and to our society by not supporting them in their jobs. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back to Chair. Thanks. Gentlelady Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I have to agree with my colleague, Ms. Fishbein, that it does damage law enforcement when people spout anti-law enforcement rhetoric, but the only such rhetoric we've heard today has been from the Republican side of the aisle, folks questioning law enforcement's motivation and threatening to defund the FBI, ATF, et cetera. And despite the repeated but false claims from our colleagues, no one on this side of the aisle has talked about those things. Look, Americans know that making our country a safer place involves more than politicians hugging a flag or professing their admiration for the police. Our communities are stronger and safer when we make investments that prevent violence by increasing mental health resources, eliminating poverty, and promoting educational and employment opportunities. We're safer when we give our police the tools they need and that they ask for to be effective and accountable and to best address the needs of the people they serve. We're safer when we keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of those we know should not have them. These are serious problems, and they demand serious policy solutions, not grandstanding and congressional resolutions. The proposals we're talking about today are not helpful. Short-staffed police departments and communities afflicted by gun violence need more than a sense of Congress and fake outrage. Where are the policies to stem the flow of crime guns to our streets? Where are the policies that crack down on ghost guns, require universal background checks, ban assault weapons, or enact red flag laws that actually work and include due process? These policies would actually make law enforcement safer and less vulnerable. Weak gun laws endanger everyone's lives, including those of policemen and women. During Police Week, we absolutely should remember all of those law enforcement officers who lost their lives in the line of duty. But our sacred duty in Congress, the way in which we must protect and serve, is to promote real policies and real laws that improve public safety and protect everyone in the communities we represent, not pass meaningless messaging bills. I urge my Republican colleagues to drop the rhetoric, come to the table, and work with us on policies that actually make our communities safer. Mr. Nadler, does our current immigration law provide for the deportation of immigrants who are convicted of assaulting police officers?
Ms. Scanlon, it's important to remember that convictions for serious assaults on law enforcement are already offenses that make someone deportable under current law. In fact, we have a wide variety of criminal grounds for deportation, nearly all of which require a conviction. Under current immigration law, if an individual is convicted of a crime of violence and sentenced to a year or more in prison, that crime is classified as an aggravated felony, a deportable offense. Likewise, conviction of a crime involving moral turpitude, in quotes, where the crime is punishable by imprisonment of 1 year or more, is a deportable offense. Both of these deportability grounds are currently invoked when there is a conviction for a serious, intentional assault on a law enforcement officer where bodily injury occurs or is intended.
Okay, so it sounds like the bill before us doesn't add anything to what already exists.
No, it does not.
You also mentioned that the bill involving purchase of a service weapon by an officer was initially introduced with bipartisan input by former police chief and Democratic Congresswoman Val Demings. How is the version before us today different, and were the changes made with bipartisan support?
Well, first of all, it's partisan now. No Democrats are invited to the bill. Second of all, one moment. Yeah, when it was reintroduced this Congress, as I said, on a strictly partisan basis, two important provisions were removed. The first would have required the retired law enforcement officer to undergo a background check, a nearly instantaneous process before receiving the weapon. As I said before, although the officer has to be in good standing, there may be circumstances that an agency is not aware of that would be caught by an background check, which is basically instantaneous. And it's not disappointing that the majority would remove such a simple requirement that could prevent the gun from falling into the wrong hands.
Okay, thank you. You know, I would just reiterate that, you know, we really want to work on these issues. We want to keep our law enforcement safe. I think we all meet regularly with the law enforcement officers in our districts, and nothing on the list of bills we're talking about here today is at the top of law enforcement's list. So I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, Chair. Thanks. The Gentlelady Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman.
Thank both of you for taking the time to come before the Rules Committee. Mr. Nadler, we're hearing a good bit of language now about how you support the police and are against defunding. When asked by the New York Post, would you be in favor of defunding New York police budget, your reply, yes, it should certainly be cut. We're spending too much money on the police. There should be substantial cuts to the police budget and reallocation of those funds to where we need them. In 2020, during the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, you would end qualified immunity for law enforcement officers. End qualified immunity, which would eliminate from the police officers I talked to entire forces. In June of 17th, the New York City Council passed a budget that cut the funding, the New York Police Department's funding by $1 billion. The 200 people were arrested in the New York City in the protest following the death of George Floyd 2 months ago, March 23rd, March of 2023. A settlement in federal court said New York City would compensate 320 New Yorkers more than $21,000 each who were surrounded, arrested, or subjected to excessive force by police, as well as another $2,500 to each person who received a desk appearance ticket. Two questions. One, I assume you stick by these comments.
I
Secondly,
think by my comments, not necessarily by some other things that were there.
do you deny anything I read?
No.
So you stick by that?
Yeah.
And you're making the case for why you support the police and are criticizing everything that Congressman Biggs
What I said.
just said. Hold on, let me just ask you something. You're, with this in your, of record, you're now making the case why what Mr. Biggs is describing does not support the police because it leaves out the Capitol Police, in your opinion. You realize New York City, New York has lost 300,000 residents. Many of them are coming to South Carolina because of just what I mentioned here. I don't know how you can sit there and make the statements you're making when your record is completely dismal when it comes to supporting the police, who are such a brave family of officers who do it for no other reason than protect the public. And you're sitting here making statements like you are as some big supporter. I don't get it. I really don't.
Are you finished?
Yes, sir.
Well, several things. First of all, I did say that the New York City Police Department budget should be reduced in order to devote more resources to mental health. And that was done. About $1 billion was shifted from the police to the mental health. And that's because when you're in the subway, I mean, we just saw an example of this last week with Mr. Neely. When you're in the subway and someone is acting out, what you need is a mental health person, not a police officer who's not trained for that. And the city of New York recognized that, and things have been better since they did that. Not good yet, but better. Secondly, let me just mention some bills I passed last.
I don't want to go there on that. Just, I mean, you're standing pretty much by what you said, which is really not only is it hypocritical, it's
not hypocritical.
amazing that you're
it's
making
not
this
hypocritical.
kind of statement. Mental health. Alvin Bragg is really doing a terrible job of basically making a mockery of the police force, and the order of law in New York City, in your statistics prove it. It's up by 34%, and people are leaving your state, and it's going to continue from what I hear. My wife used to love to go there, not going again, by just as what happened on the subways. There's no place in New York that's safe other than a few places. Mr. Biggs, the criticisms have been leveled at, as you responded to outlandish claims by the Democrat representatives here on the Rules Committee. Have you ever heard anything like this before? To sit here at, when they were in charge, they did everything but dismantle the police and support it. They supported the criminals rather than the victims and blamed it on mental illness, which I don't doubt. But people that do the shootings now are mentally ill. But do you get what they're getting at?
Hey, Mr. Norman, I appreciate that. You asked if I'd ever heard anything like this before. Yeah, I sit on the Judiciary Committee. We hear this a lot, this type of stuff a lot. And, you know, I don't know if you want me to start reading off all the statements that I have here from Democrats, members of this Congress, about defunding. You've heard the one from Ranking Member Nadler, and you might not have heard the one from Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who told CNN regarding defunding the police, you have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. How about Cori Bush? She's kind of the poster child for defunding the police. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she says, this is what happens when leaders sign blank check after blank check to militarize police, CBP, et cetera, while letting violence go unchecked. We need answers, and we need to defend. And after New York cut that $1 billion you're talking about, she said she thought the cuts didn't go far enough. Representative Jamal Bowman said similar things. He said, too many police in our country are more concerned with protecting white supremacy than serving the communities that pay their salaries. We don't need police with lethal weapons carrying out routine traffic stops. We need to reallocate police funding to unarmed traffic forces to remove even the possibility of sanctioned manslaughter. If you've ever worked with police, if you've ever done traffic, which I did, I prosecuted traffic offenses. The last thing in the world I want is to send anybody out there to deal with people who are, maybe they're drunk, maybe they're agitated, and they're unarmed to defend themselves in the public. Representative Pramila Jayapal said it's completely reasonable for us to shift significant resources from law enforcement and invest in people. Again, Representative Ilhan Omar. Representative Ayanna Pressley said the defund movement isn't new. Folks are just finally listening. We got money for wars, but can't feed the poor. And finally, Representative Rashida Tlaib said, when we say defund police, what we mean is people are dying, and we need to invest in people's livelihoods instead. So, Representative Norman, when you asked me, have I ever heard stuff like this before? Yeah, I have. I sit on the Judiciary Committee, and this is their message constantly. And so it gets convoluted and lost, but they're the party that's really happy to defund police. Yield back.
The preview of coming attractions is being seen all across this country with the illegal aliens that the Democratic Party is allowing to come into this country. Don't check them out, have no background report, don't know if they got the COVID shot or not when they were coming across when I went. You're from Arizona, you're a border state. We're all from border states now. 15 million that'll be in this country, I don't know how you walk that back. And the most unfair part of that is when that police officer stops a illegal alien, doesn't know anything about him, doesn't know whether his driver's license is real or not. That life is in danger of that officer, and it is a sad day in this country that they are allowing this to happen. No one on this panel has spoken up against the tragedy and the hypocrisy of allowing our borders, this country, to be invaded, which you can't say any other way. We've got an invasion going on, and hopefully the next administration will do what they can to deport the whatever number that can come in. And how many lives are going to be lost is so sad. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the witnesses for being here. In the dissenting views provided by the minority on H. Conrad's 40, it was stated that the majority has repeatedly attempted to label the minority as the party of defund the police. And the majority continues to falsely claim that all members of the minority support defunding the police, attempting to connect the actions of the few to the minority more broadly, end quote. Mr. Biggs, in your view, is the policy objective to defund the police an action of a few among the Democratic Party, or is it of more than that?
Thank you for the question. I think it's pretty broad in that party, to be honest with you.
Yes, and to your point, I'd like to take a moment to highlight a memo that your committee released in 2021. In that memo, the committee highlighted 22 cities that had instituted a total of $1.73 billion in cuts to their police. An additional 4 cities were considering an additional $130.5 million in cuts at that same time. And at the time, every one of these cities either had both Democratic mayors and Democratic-controlled councils. These are blue cities run by Democrats often for decades. And in many cases, almost all of them for decades, it's hard to characterize the actions of some of our country's biggest cities, New York, LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, San Francisco, as the actions of the few when it comes to calls to defund the police. These also happen to be some of the most dangerous cities in the United States of America. and nearly all of them have seen skyrocketing crime since their Democratic-controlled city governments made the decision to defund our brave men and women working to keep communities and residents safe. New York City, one of the leaders in the defund the police movement, saw felony crime at levels not seen in 15 years. Last year, New York City saw a 22.4% jump in serious offenses, including felony assault, rape, burglary, robberies, grand larceny, and many others. Now, again, these are major cities where Democrats have a monopoly on the levers of power, and they've chosen to pull those levers against our men and women in blue. The defund the police movement is not the movement of a few. It's a message that has been wholly embraced by the Democratic leadership. If members of the minority are so opposed to the defund the police message, then I urge them to reject the so-called few who embrace such a message and join their Republican colleagues in what is a very straightforward, positive action to demonstrate congressional support for those that risk everything, every day, to keep our community safe. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just note that if you looked at the manner in which the Democrats in Congress voted for and passed numerous bills last cycle that increased funding for police, I was very appreciative of the ones that increased funding for smaller police officers, since I come from a rural area and we have smaller police forces because we have a lot of small police forces in New Mexico. I was very appreciative of the increased funding we had to assist police in many, many ways through the Department of Justice. And one of the concerns I have is that this resolution, Congressional Resolution 40, it does leave out some important things. It leaves out state police. I just talked about a horrible event in my district. The response to that shooting was made by the Farmington Police, which is a local law enforcement. It also have a state police. We have a local law enforcement, Farmington officer, and a state police officer, both at the hospital. It leaves out tribal police. It leaves out all of the different federal police that work in New Mexico. And I would say that what we need is to have all law enforcement always working together. And so we must and should praise all of them, and we should encourage both more funding and more cooperation, collaboration, because it is through that cooperation, collaboration, through honoring their hard work, because my state police, they are amazing. I meet with them on a regular basis. They deserve the recognition. They deserve the funding that we have always, and under Democrats, have always provided, because it is the funding that we have done that we should be judged on. Of what are we doing? And we have funded the police. Ranking Member Nadler, would you like to address some of the concerns that have been raised?
Yes, I would, and thank you for asking. We've heard a lot about the Democrats defunding the police and so forth. Facts belie that. Large cities with Democratic mayors spend far more money on policing and hire far more police officers than large cities with Republican mayors. The 25 largest Democratic-run cities employ 75% more police officers than the 25 largest Republican-run cities on a per capita basis. The 25 largest Democratic-run cities spend 38% more on policing than the 25 largest Republican-run cities, again, on a per capita basis. In the most recent budget cycle, the 25 largest Democratic-run cities collectively increased their police budgets more than the 25 largest Republican-run cities, albeit by a modest 4.34% versus 4.11%. Republicans talk more about funding the police than they do actually funding the police. And that's why, for example, while the South Carolina murder rate increased 22% from 2019 to 2020, it has the sixth highest per capita murder rate. New York State, on the other hand, is 34th in murder rates, and New York City is one of the safest major cities. In fact, of the top 10 states with the highest murder rates, 8 are red states. And let me just add that in the last Congress, I passed 4 bills that I'll mention. The Invest to Protect Act, which authorized $300 million in grants to local law enforcement agencies with fewer than 125 officers, in other words, small departments. 55 Republicans voted no. The Victim Act, which authorized $100 million in grants to law enforcement agencies to help solve violent crimes and close outstanding cases. 178 Republicans voted no. The assault weapons ban that keeps weapons of war off the streets, nearly every Republican voted no. And the Law Enforcement De-Escalation Training Act, sponsored in the Senate by Senator Cornyn to fund de-escalation training, 159 Republicans in the House voted no.
Thank you, Ranking Member Nadler. And I think when you look at the record, there is a consistent record of Democrats voting for increased funding for law enforcement on a regular basis, at least in the last cycle. And we passed many of those bills out of the floor, and some of them were actually also signed into law because they passed on the Senate. With that, Ranking Member, is there anything else you'd like to add? If not, I yield.
All set, thank you.
Okay, I'll yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. We should just offer the gentleman from Arizona a chance to respond if he wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to point out just 2 things. I mean, I don't want to relitigate everything, but just 2 things. Number one is federal funding of police. When you talk to local law enforcement, they are scared to death that with this funding will be the mechanism to federalize local law enforcement. That really is a concern with them. I talk to our local chiefs all the time about a series of issues. And the other one is my distinguished colleague, the ranking member, was talking repeatedly about red state murder rates. That's a blue city problem in red states. That's what it is. It's blue cities in red states, and that's what causes the problem. I'll yield back. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Are there any other questions for this panel? If not, I thank the witnesses for their testimony, and they are excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any other member seeking to testify on H.R. 2494, H.R. 3091, or H.Con. Res. 40? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion. Without objection, the committee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.